Hello, welcome to Lecture 3A. Today we'll be talking about the Johari window, which is a really interesting classical theory from interpersonal communication that I believe will help you better understand how to be a successful communicator in the business world. In this presentation, I will briefly lay out the foundations of the Johari window, and then I will go through each of the elements of it. Along the way, I'll be talking about how we apply this to interpersonal communication, because this is a great way to understand some of the choices that you can make about self-disclosure, self-improvement, and so on. This is the Johari window. It's a 2x2 table. The columns are things that we know about ourselves and that we don't know about ourselves. And the rows are things that other people know about us and things that other people do not know about us. So the top left quadrant is what we call the open area or the arena. Now, when I say arena, you might think something like this. This is an ancient Roman gladiatorial arena. This one happens to be in France, but you know the type I'm talking about. And you may even therefore be imagining something like this, which is two gladiators fighting to the death. That, frankly, and hopefully, is not what the arena looks like in your place of business now and in the future. More like an arena, something like this, where we've got here the rock group Kiss is playing to a group of thousands of adoring audience members in an arena, and so they're a good example of arena rock. But the point is that we are looking to talk about something where hopefully everything is in tune, everything comes together, everyone is having an okay time, and everyone is getting what they expect to get and seeing what they expect to be seeing. When we talk about the arena, therefore, we're just talking about things where you know something about yourself that other people also know about you, and that means that you can adapt accordingly. And it doesn't even have to necessarily be your strongest trait or your best feature that everyone knows about you. I mean, if you're really good at sales and it's time to make a sales pitch, and your whole team looks at you because you're the strongest salesperson on the team, then great. That's an excellent example of where information being known to you and to others in your workplace can be really helpful. But it can also be the case where you're absolutely terrible at sales, and everyone knows that, and you know that about yourself, and everyone accepts this about you. I mean, hopefully you're not terrible at sales and that's your job, but if going out and making a pitch is plays to all of your weakest characteristics, then if you know that and your team knows that about you, then you can look for somebody else to go out and make that pitch, and that's totally fine. My son is also gives us a great example here. I hope you don't mind me. I hope you don't mind me picking on him a little bit and making a bit of a personal example, but I think it's a really a lighthearted one. He's 16 now, so he's a pretty cool cat. I mean, he has a lot of self-awareness and a lot of social awareness and can take care of himself pretty well. But from about 10 to 13, he was still at the point where he would not eat. I'm fine. No, I'm not hungry. And then all of a sudden he would have a meltdown and get really hangry, which is hungry plus angry. So when he's hungry or tired, he just gets cranky or would get cranky at the time, and he knew it, and I knew it, and we could adapt accordingly. We could just be really honest, like, Finnegan, you're just really hungry and you need food. Like, yes, I'm just really hungry and I need food. Okay, what are our options? And then we would proceed. So the fact that he knew that about himself and I knew that about him allowed us to adapt accordingly. So what I'm getting at is that the arena or the open area is really where the most productive communication tends to happen, because you know what your strengths and weaknesses are in a way that's well known to the team. You know this about other people in the team, and therefore you can adapt accordingly in terms of dividing labor and in terms of deciding how to proceed. The next square I want to talk about is the area that you know but that other people don't know about you. These are your secrets, also known as the facade or the hidden area. These are secrets that we generally don't want others to know, or just that we haven't gotten around to disclosing to others. It could be perfectly banal stuff like, I don't like mayonnaise on my sandwiches. And then this is something that you can share with other people or not as you see fit, and that other people will come to identify about you based on the amount of disclosures that you have. Maybe, and I hope this is not true, but to pick an example from you, an actual student here at MSU Denver, maybe you have a very strong desire to be at a different college. I hope that's not true, but if it is, you probably don't want to say it at the top of your lungs. I was the associate dean for 2 years up until this fall, and so I actually know a lot about other colleges. And so in this case, disclosing that to me, bringing that into the arena, and saying, "Hey, Professor Herman, I think maybe there's another school that's a better fit for me. Could you help me think through that?" I actually would be somebody that could be reasonably helpful for you. Although I will disclose to you that I will try to talk you into staying if I think that's a good fit for you. Only if I think that's a good fit for you. But a lot of other professors and maybe your classmates might appreciate that a little bit less if you were to say something like that or disclose something like that. So this is an opportunity of an instance of something that we might want to keep to ourselves. So what would the workplace equivalent be? Let's say that you hate your job and have been carpet bombing other companies with your resume. Again, I would advise you to keep that within the facade, to keep that to yourself. But this can also be harmless stuff like hobbies, interests, minutiae about your family. And so stuff that's within the hidden area that you can disclose is a way that you can expand the open area and reduce the hidden area. And when we trust our colleagues with these disclosures, with disclosing some of our secrets to them, we expand this arena area between us and we tear down the facade. When we do that, this builds trust and it builds interpersonal relationships. Mutual disclosure is probably the simplest and easiest way to build trust. I reveal something about myself, you reciprocate, and pretty soon we feel closer because our shared arena is larger than our arena for the broader community. You feel like you understand me better than the average colleague, and that makes us feel closer. Therefore, disclosure to a colleague is an excellent way to build interpersonal trust because you invite them to disclose to you as well, and then their arena is more open between the two of you. Their facade shrinks a little bit, and that when you start small, offer a little bit about yourself, invite them to offer a little bit about themselves. People generally like to talk about themselves, so it's usually an invitation that is taken. And as we go that way, mutually disclosing about ourselves a little more, then we build a good relationship at work, and pretty soon we have the foundation for trust and mutual understanding that is the basis for solid work that can then get done. Now, don't just focus on the communication part of interpersonal communication. That will come as you become more expert. Focus on the interpersonal part. Communication is a tool to build and maintain relationships. It's not merely a tool to complete the task that is immediately in front of you. Always be thinking about what is this doing for my relationships with this colleague, with this supplier, with this client, and always work to build those relationships. The best and happiest and most successful people at work build good relationships with all of the people that they come into contact with, at least to the best of their ability. So now I want to talk to the upper right corner of the Johari window, the area that is known to others but not known to you. That is the blind spot. Now, this is an important one to understand and one that we should always be looking to reduce. And so we should always be thinking, how do we reduce this area and bring more of this information into the arena where we can see it too? Because often these are, our personal foibles, shortcomings, characteristics and tendencies that are plainly visible to at least some other people, but that are not visible to us. And that creates a real disadvantage for us in the workplace. In other words, how do we expand the open arena in such a way that reduces the blind area? And as this graphic illustrates, the way that we do that is with feedback. So you should always be looking for feedback. You should always be open to feedback and openly soliciting it, even when none is forthcoming. The best way to do that is simply just to ask. Which brings me back though to the topic of giving feedback, because you also want to think about what it's like when you are the person who's pushing this line into someone's blind spot, such that you're making them aware of something, because that can be a really dicey area. And I really like the book's input on how to give feedback. I think that's incredibly important and very well thought out. But there's a metaphor I want to talk about very briefly that sort of extends and builds upon this, that thinks about it in terms of how do we give feedback in a way that builds interpersonal relationships. And that starts with the metaphor of the feedback sandwich. I assume many of you have heard of this, but for those of you who have not, the idea is that you have positive feedback followed by constructive criticism, and then you conclude with positive feedback. This is a way to adjust our feedback so that we to attenuate our feedback to the fact that we're dealing with humans who have emotions, who have pride, and so on. And so we always want to make sure that we're not making people feel downtrodden or pushed upon with negative criticism, that the constructive criticism is part of a broader mix and that you acknowledge their strengths as well. Now, that interpersonal focus is an important one, but it's not the only reason that we do this. It's also important to remember to give some positive feedback as well. And when we structure it this way, at least as a default, and then think about ways to modify this, we should at least always be thinking about where do we put the positive feedback or positive criticism, because that positive feedback is an important part of the feedback loop, and people need to know what they're good at in your eyes so that they can continue to do that and continue to build upon those strengths, because sometimes people won't realize that, and then they'll stop doing something that you found valuable and that other members of the team found valuable, and that's a real loss. We want to make sure that that never happens. Now, I alluded to this, though, but I also want you to think about ways to mix up this metaphor and think about different ratios of bread to meat and putting them in different orders, so to speak. And think about the interpersonal dynamics that go into a situation when you're giving feedback, and think about this metaphor in ways that we can remix this quote, food. Right. So if you are working with a supervisor who just demoted a colleague for honest feedback, and then there's some occasion for you to be giving feedback to the supervisor comes to you and says, hey, that presentation to the client, how did it go? I would encourage you to use lots of bread and skimp on the meat, because the supervisor has established that they're not really actually open to a lot of constructive criticism. Is it a relationship where you have plenty of time and there's not really a hard limit on how long you can have this discussion with someone? And is it a relationship where you have lots of trust? In that case, then consider making it a feedback wrap instead. So imagine just layers of positive and constructive, and positive and negative, and positive and negative, and just kind of as you go through it, through the different layers, just going through stuff in order, and maybe you could even imagine unwrapping the layers together or mixing it all together. Are you worried the constructive criticism will get lost because the person that you're giving feedback to has a history of not hearing constructive criticism? You've tried feedback sandwiches with them before and all they hear is the positive part? Then you might consider either a naked burger or an open-faced sandwich, right? Where it's either all meat or all meat on top but some bread in the end. I would recommend the latter. I would always try to encourage at least a little bit of positive feedback whenever possible. But if you want to lead with the constructive criticism just to make sure that that's what they hear, or you could even invert it, constructive criticism, some positive feedback, and then just reinforce the constructive criticism that you've already discussed and say that that's really the something that you know and trust that they will work on, but that's something that they have to work on. And then some people just don't require any ego stroking, and you may know that all of the positive feedback that you would give them is something that they're already pretty aware of. Then maybe you hold the bread. It's if the situation calls for it, we don't necessarily have to have any bread in the feedback sandwich, so to speak. So the feedback sandwich is a default. It's a good way to sort of begin thinking about how you're going to give feedback to somebody, but always be willing and able to mix it up. And the way that you decide how to do this should be tethered to the interpersonal dynamics between you and the other person to whom you were giving feedback. The final window of the Johari window, the final quadrant of the Johari window is this unknown area where it's unknown to other people and it's unknown to ourselves. Maybe you've never given a high stakes sales presentation and you're a pretty good verbal communicator, pretty good at giving pitches and presentations in the office to colleagues and peers, but you've just never done it in front of clients, and so you don't know how it's going to go, and your teammates don't know how it's going to go. And so this is an unknown area. There are lots and lots and lots of unknown unknowns in life and in the office. And so the one way to do this, though, to deal with this is to look for opportunities for self-discovery. In other words, to look for opportunities to at least bring some of these areas into the part of the Johari window that's the facade where we at least know it about ourselves. And one way to do that is to engage in personality tests, strength and weakness tests, all of the different psychological, psychometric measures that build upon this. I've got a great one called DISC. I have used DISC for years with students and talking about identifying their strengths and weaknesses. And so I'm going to, after this lecture, I'm gonna have another lecture up where we talk about DISC and I provide a brief explanation about what goes into that. I think that's an excellent exercise. I'm going to provide the link to a free way to get that quiz and then a brief discussion about what those results mean for you so that you can expand some of the areas that you know about yourself and do so in private in such a way that you don't have to do this in front of others, and so it really can remain unknown to others except to the extent that you want to reveal it. Except some of it will also be closing some blind spot, because there will be some things you'll discover where you realize, oh, other people probably did see this about me and now I see it about myself. But largely it's going to be expanding the facade and shrinking the unknown area. Now I keep talking about these different areas, dragging the lines around and sort of resizing the volume or the area in each quadrant. And I want you to think about these as not fixed, but as lines that can move as we go about time. And to think about that more clearly, I want to provide an example. This is from the communication theory website at communicationtheory.org. One example would be when you start a new job. The size of your different Johari window squares would look something like this. So the unknown is pretty large. It's pretty large. You don't know enough about the context to know how you're going to respond. The people in that context already don't know enough about you to really understand you very well. And so your blind spot, where it's known to others but not known to you, is pretty small. And the hidden area facade is pretty big, because you at least know some things about yourself that most of the other people in the office don't know about you yet. But the unknown, but based on how you're going to react to the different elements of that context, because you just don't know the context, and you know to some extent how you're going to react to it is still unknown. It's still to be determined. Even if somebody was to explain it to you in some detail, you still don't know exactly what you're going to do there. This unknown quadrant is definitely the largest, and so as you go into a new job, your Johari window is going to look something like this, and then your mission is to reduce your blind spot as fast as possible, and then consider what of your hidden area or facade would you like to disclose, and to whom would you like to disclose it, and at what rate, because again, that's a way to build trust, but at the same time, it's something that you should do in a mutual way, and in a way that's fairly equitable, so that you're not telling all of your deepest, darkest, fears and worries about, oh, when this happens, I freaked out sometimes, and you're sharing this with someone who doesn't even know you that well yet, and you don't know anything about them. That's setting you up for a failure as well. So the thinking about how can I know more about the context and better prepare myself for how I'm going to respond in this context is a really important part of thinking about how you're going to start in a new role. So that's just one example of the Johari window in application, and thinking about some of the different variables that go into it. And I hope this has added some clarity and some insight as you think about interpersonal communication in a professional context. That's all I have on this. Like I said, we will be talking about ways of self-discovery, tools for self-discovery, such as the DISC tool, and I'll post those on the Canvas before the lecture in which I explain how to interpret those results, because I think that's really helpful and insightful. Thanks so much. See you in the next lecture.